Thabang from the Wildlife College and also a fellow at the African Wildlife Economy Institute. So I'm going to talk about something pretty much very different. And before I just start my talk, I just want to quote a few of the speakers that spoke here from yesterday in what they said, because it actually resonates with what I'm going to talk about here. So the first one was David from Traffic, who said something about rights and ownership, that how do you care about something that you actually do not own or have ownership to? I'm sorry, David, if I misquoted you. And the second person was actually Nogutula from UNDP, who mentioned where agriculture meets conservation. And there was a big debate about if wildlife ranching is agriculture or conservation, and agriculture, and also how agriculture contributes to conservation, and if we are really actually talking about agriculture at a wildlife economy symposium, and we talking about it. We have to talk about it because, when you look at that picture behind me, what you see on the far left is actually a head, and I think I'm right. What you see on the far left is also a head. And this head, there's people that have ownership to it, and this head, there's people that have ownership to it. Both of these heads have the same or more or less similar function to the ecosystem and actually to the ecological processes on the environment. And I want to start with a philosophy that says, I think it is very important to meet people where they are. And if we want to engage communities and involve them into conservation practices and also into the wildlife economy, we should actually meet them where they are. And in so doing is that this head can actually be used where this head exists to perform the same function. But in so doing, in this case, in the current state, in South Africa more especially, this head is excluded, is outside of the peripheries, outside of the territories of the fences, where there is no food, there is no water, there is not enough grass for them to graze. But in this area, there's a lot of space, there's a lot of grass, there's where these animals can also graze. But in other countries, like in Mozambique, in Maputo, you have all these systems being put together to actually, improve ecosystems and restore habitat. And I just want to put that in context before I then just continue with my talk. If we continue continuous selective grazing in communal rangelands, we end up having something like this. And the same system is what we have in our protected areas, because no one is herding the animals, they are free living. And what is happening in there is actually continuous selective grazing, because animals will always go to where the grass is good, and they will feed all the grass that is good and leave the grass that is not nice, and then cause deserts. And this is not what we want. But in this case, what we need to do, we can utilize this tool, this resource that community owns within protected areas to actually achieve the goal that the head in the protected areas are supposed to be doing through regenerative rangeland grazing. And the regenerative land grazing is not a typical rotational grazing where you take animals from this place to the next, but is a planned adaptive management plan in terms of grazing that is governed and led by communities. So this is not what we want, definitely. And what we need to do is actually to see how can we manage biodiversity at a landscape level. How can we include people using what they own and what they love so much to include them to unlock and help enable this wildlife-based economy that we're talking about. And perhaps you don't have to talk about the wildlife-based economy, but talk about the nature-based economy that includes the rangelands economy and the wildlife-based economy and the biodiversity economy. And because quite a lot of time, what we are good at is actually throwing words around and not qualifying exactly what do they actually mean, you know. And for the first time in conservation areas, we can use what is considered as the problem, looking at issues like diseases and FMDs and all those, red and green zones and line, those ones, to actually, as a tool to improve wildlife habitat and improve the socioeconomic issues with communities by allowing access under an agreed grazing plan. That means cattle can go into protected areas and graze instead of burning all the grass, the good grass that we have, that the cattle can have in the protected areas, and we can help communities survive. Instead of looking at nature positive conservation practice, if we want to include communities, how about we talk about people positive conservation practices before that? And with this process, this actually explains how this process is done, but you don't have to dwell much into it, but it has to do with professional heading, introducing professional heading within the space of nature-based economy. So in this case, it means that you have headers looking after the cattle 24 hours. If they are not being headed, they're in the kraal. And if they're in the kraal and if they're being headed, things like women-wildlife conflict between protected areas and communities living around protected areas are very minimal because the cattle are always looked after. For example, in the Makolek in Pafuri, there hasn't been lions for a long time because snares have been put up because lions are doing what? They're killing the cattle. But if this is introduced and there's some sort of working together between communities and parks, we can then avoid such things. We can then bring back lions and have the cattle being headed, and then we reduce all those problems. So what I want to say is that this is not what it's talking about. We're not talking about just grazing and bringing animals in the park and letting them graze. We're not talking about rotational grazing, of which it seems to be an acceptable thing, but it's not the best. But we need to talk about planned adaptive grazing management plans with communities. And in this case, someone spoke about conservation as a byproduct. In this case, we have conservation that people in the communities do to restore rangelands as a unintended positive consequence. Thank you.